Welcome everyone for another session from Kitchener Developer Group. Today we have Andrew Davis and he's going to talk about DevOps. Quick introduction about myself. My name is Sudipta Dev. I am a Salesforce independent technical architect. I'm a Salesforce platform champion. This is my blog. I am a certified application architect leading Kitchener Group, and this is my Twitter handle.
Thank you so much. And because we've got a smaller group here, many of you actually from the Kitchener area, or is this now the international group that just just happened to gather?
It's an international group.
Okay, yeah, all of the locality stuff has changed a lot. Um, I've got a presentation, I've got a pre-packaged, talk and so forth, but I'd love to, make this interactive as well, especially because we have a relatively smaller group here. I know we're going to record this, but if you have questions, thoughts you want to share, if anybody wants to go on video, then that will help me to engage with humans a bit more. But otherwise, I can do a really good monologue, no, no problem, but I'm really happy to have a dialogue. If you guys have questions, anything I can clarify as we go through here. I certainly don't want to leave this, hey, thank you, Shilpa. I certainly don't want to make this just just one-sided.
Oh, that makes sense. And I think we have one person definitely from Brussels, Belgium, Shilpa. So we are international.
It's very international. Shilpa is apparently from outer space, along with Mark. But look at this.
Yes.
There are actual
But
humans. I thought it was just all bots that you'd hired, Sudeep. Okay. So let me just level set. So are you guys mostly on the Salesforce developer side of things, Salesforce admin side of things, something else?
so yeah, I'm an admin transitioning as a developer. So I have basic knowledge on development, Apex, Visual Force. Yes.
How many of you guys have done deployment, Salesforce deployments before?
Yes, I have.
Change sets, something else?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Mostly change sets. Anybody used anything other than change sets? Salesforce DX, Salesforce CLI, and commercial tool, anything like that? Should you
Salesforce DX.
Also
Yeah,
do
knowledge.
GitHub, quick deploy.
Okay. Cool. Great. All right. Well, I think you guys kind of know roughly what we're talking about here then, but what I'd like to do is to talk you through, this is a talk I've given a few times before, but I'll try to step everybody through and make sure it's clear. Yeah, I'm going to start with a thank you slide. I stole this from Salesforce. They always start with a thank you, but it's really the wisest, best way to do things because you guys already, just by showing up, turning your cameras on, giving me a chance to, Sudeep to inviting me, giving me a chance to share ideas. I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity. I do hope not to disappoint particularly. Thank you very much, Mark. Good applause. So my name is Andrew Davis. I'm the Senior Director of Research and Innovation at Copado. I wrote this book called Mastering Salesforce DevOps. So if you like this talk and want to go a lot deeper, there's the book as one way to really dive in a little bit more. But what I'm going to talk about here, why DevOps, Salesforce DevOps capabilities, automating the process, but then also, if we have time, we'll get into a little bit estimating the business value and the risk. In a sense, what we're doing with this conversation is we're elevating the challenge of building on Salesforce from just the discussion of how do you build one thing, how do you configure a flow, how do you write an Apex class and so forth, to something bigger than that, which is how do you do that easily and repeatably, and something even bigger than that, which is how does the whole team work together to build a lot of stuff, and over time, how does all of that stuff work smoothly together with everybody kind of being able to continue to innovate without slowing down over time. And then even elevating bigger than that, what's the impact of your development team functioning very smoothly to convert ideas into awesomeness versus the impact of your development team kind of struggling and not having the right tools or processes or understanding? Like, what's the impact on the overall business? I just got off of a call where we were talking a bit more about financial impact and so forth. If you're working, if you're not just a volunteer, if you're working for a company, somebody's paying you, the company's paying you, the implication there is that you are delivering some value above and beyond the salary that they're paying you. And so then we, at some point, ought to ask the question, well, why are they paying me? How can I deliver the most value? How can my team deliver the most value? They're paying a lot. Because if you're not asking that question, I promise you, somebody else higher up in the organization is asking that question. And it's better for you to ask that question first, think about it, and think about how can we bring the most value we possibly can as a development team for the organization. So I'd like to start with this point. You have an important job. That is good news. You have a very important job. And this is why. This is the way I like to explain it. That the people who build your org, they build your company. So this is you. You're down living in this red dot here. You're part of a development team. Maybe you're doing Service Cloud, something else. What are you doing? You're building an application. You're building a Service Cloud application. Just a little bit theoretical, but you do something similar to this, right? Why? Well, because you're supporting employees, right? You're supporting Service Cloud users, right? And why, right? Because they, in turn, are supporting customers, a lot of customers, but actually you're supporting a lot of users, right? And they're supporting a lot of customers. So if you begin to get out of just your day job and begin to see, well, why are you building that app? What are you doing for the company? You begin to see that the development teams have an exponential impact on your business. I've done a lot of surveys. One of the questions I always ask is how many Salesforce users are there? And then how many admins and developers are there? And the typical ratio that I find is about 300 to 1. So a typical admin or developer serving roughly 300 Salesforce users. That's not something you need to feel arrogant about. It's something you should take a healthy pride in and think, my job has a big impact on the company. And so if you ask, what is the most important link in this particular chain? I would say it's this first link. Your ability for you as a development team to deliver updates to this Service Cloud app is the most important link, just because it's the first one. It's all the other capabilities come out of this, and that we really need to do a good job. You need good tools to do your job. We need to figure out good tools, processes, and so forth to really make your job as easy as possible. What are you doing in your day job? Well, you're making other people's work as easy as possible, right? If you're supporting Service Cloud users, your job is to make their workflow smooth, make it so they can handle more customers and bring more goodness and so forth. Well, you need good tools to do your job too. So I like to think about what you do. I used to build apps on Salesforce, so I can sort of infer what you do. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what you do is you convert ideas into awesomeness, as I said before. So you've got ideas, your company has ideas, but what's limiting your ability to realize them? Sometimes, depending on the platform you're building on, you've got technology constraints. It's just hard to, crank out apps if you're building custom applications from scratch. So what Salesforce does is it allows you to convert more ideas into awesomeness. Than if you were to build everything, code everything from scratch. You can move faster, do more goodness. But what if you've got skill constraints? What if the limiting factor on your team is skill constraints? Well, you've got Trailhead, right? What's Trailhead do? It ups your skills so you can deliver more awesomeness. What if there's team constraints, right? Well, you can hire somebody. You can get professional services, consulting companies to come in there and pay them a lot of money, and they can help you to deliver a lot more awesomeness. But what if at the end of the day, you're still stuck with these process constraints? Because I talk to a lot of big fancy professional services companies. Sudipta and I used to work at Aperio together, but they don't necessarily have the world's best processes either. So that's what DevOps does. It's maximizing your ability to convert ideas into awesomeness. And if you look at some of the statistics on here, the teams that do a really good job at this, they have 200 times more frequent deployments than the teams who do a less awesome job of delivering awesomeness, to overuse the word. They have 100 times shorter lead time. It means that they can get features out in hours, as opposed to days or weeks, for example. Fewer change failures. They break things in production less, and they can recover in minutes, for example, instead of days from issues. So that's what we're talking about today, is how to improve the processes and the tools that are used to deliver innovation. So I'm preaching to the choir here. I don't need to tell you this. Salesforce makes it easy to build. Easy is great, right? But some conditions apply, because one of the things, there is a little bit of trouble with easy. The trouble with easy is that easy means fast, which means more, which means complex. So it's super easy to build a flow, right? And so you then build one, and you build another one, you build another one, you build, and you get 8 flows, and you have a new account that's created, and you've got 8 flows that kick off, and 7 workflow rules, and 4 apex triggers, and then somebody's like, hey, why is this thing breaking? You're like, okay, well, let me take 3 days to figure out why that thing is breaking. So the complexity on Salesforce is all about easy, 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 easy. But the problem is, if you get too much easy, it's not so easy anymore, right? So Salesforce is like building with Legos, but things add up, right? Eventually you're building Salesforce Tower with Legos. Except the thing with Salesforce Tower is you hired a whole bunch of very expensive architects and engineers, and they spent a couple of years planning and so forth before they built it. But we're building stuff incrementally and iteratively as we go, and it's not necessarily, it doesn't, we can't know everything in advance. And so often the towers that we're building with our Salesforce orgs are a lot more like a Jenga tower compared to a Salesforce tower, right? Where you pull a little bit here and you're like, oh, whoops, sorry, I'll put that back here, I'll reconstruct this. So bigger orgs with bigger teams, you need to be increasingly careful. And that's the tricky thing. So what I'd like to talk about is deployments. What all deployments are, it's making it easy to move changes. So I've got this little cautionary note: friends, don't let friends run projects without DevOps. But so your basic option 1 is build your stuff directly in production. Just go into production, make a change, right? You're an admin, you've got super user powers. But the problem with that is that there's a risk of failures. And what's so bad about failures? You end up with people yelling at you. Nobody wants people yelling at them, right? So that is bad option 1, is not having any process. So option 2 is you start working in sandboxes, right? But the first challenge that you come up against is, especially if you're building a lot of stuff, it becomes hard to deploy. So what does hard to deploy mean? Well, maybe that's just the cost of life. But if it's hard to deploy, and then certainly it's hard to deploy data as well, what does that mean when something's hard? It means you procrastinate. You do it as infrequently as you possibly can, right? So if deployments are hard, you're going to deploy infrequently, as infrequently as you can possibly get away with, which means you're going to have big deployments. When you do deploy, you're going to have really big deployments because you deploy once a month or whatever, once a week. When you have big deployments, you've got a high risk of failures. And if you don't want those high risk of failures, you've got to have a lot of coordination. You've got to have these meetings and so forth. And then you've got to have a lot of testing and so forth. And what that means is you have even less frequent deployments because you've got to, it's so expensive to figure out this deployment process. And that means you get delayed feedback. Instead of being able to tweak something and say, hey, what do you think now? Does this work? Is this better? You have to tweak something, wait till the end of the month for it to deploy across, and then ask people, well, what do you think now? And they don't even remember that they asked you to build the thing. So you get poor quality, which means people try to test more, you get project delays, and in the end, you just got people yelling at you again. So it's not what we're really looking for. So bad option 1 is no process. Bad option number 2 is slow process. Any of this resonating with you guys?
Probably both.
Sorry?
It's both.
You've been there. Yeah. And you just oscillate between them. Okay, well, maybe we'll just build things in production if it's that hard. So your first job is make deployments easier, because that's the first trick in the challenge. So you make deployments easier. So if we just ask ourselves the basic question, how can you achieve both speed and reliability? So your starting point, imagine the starting point pre-Salesforce, building from scratch, traditional IT, custom code, custom database. Well, Salesforce makes things fast. And the fastest way to build on Salesforce is do it right in production. That is fast, right? But that's not very safe. So if you want to be safe, you have separate orgs, development, test, production. But what do you really want? You want fast and safe, both, right? So you need multiple orgs, dev, test, and production orgs. But you need a way to orchestrate the flow of changes so they can move quickly, right? Fast and safe. Some questions. I'd love to just open it up. If there's any particular things you'd like to know about today that I may just be able to cover verbally, I'd love to know that. I'd also love to know if any of you are starting to implement any of these kinds of DevOps processes on your team, and then what are your biggest challenges in your development process? Any?
Yep, I can say something like, in my recent project, we are starting the DevOps process. So far I have done the DevOps process with the traditional, sandbox. With the Scratch org, it's becoming a little pain for me. So maybe that is something like if you can focus.
Okay. Are you guys building unlocked packages from the Scratch org?
Yes.
Okay. And what part is painful, most painful?
It's building the dependencies.
The package dependencies?
The package dependencies.
Okay. And how many packages do you have?
We have, I think as of now, we have successfully able to build 3 packages with lots of dependencies in between. But we are trying to make it as independent packages as possible. But it's becoming challenge. We are missing something. Every day it's a new exploration. Like every day we're learning something. Okay, there's new dependencies that's coming up.
And I guess there's 2 levels of dependencies. There's metadata depends on each other. You depend on a field and the account object, but then there's package dependency. But I'm guessing with 3 packages, right now you're mostly struggling with metadata dependencies.
Metadata dependencies, exactly.
When you get 10 packages, you'll be mostly struggling with package dependencies.
Package dependencies, exactly.
So that your future is a slightly new shade of pain and difficulty. But
I know.
So are you taking an existing org and refactoring it into packages?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the existing org with 3 different business units, each having their own different, deployment cycle, and they're trying to standardize and bringing Salesforce DX into picture. So that's where the journey started, and now we are helping them, but we are facing lots of problems there.
Okay. So I'm not going to be able to spend a ton of time on that, but I would say that's not uncommon, that people, as they begin to try to move into the world of unlocked packages and Scratch orgs, they do encounter these things, and that's why it's been very slow progress for people, most organizations. And so at the heart of your workflow, you're always going to have an org-based deployment process that you need to get that smooth running first, I would say, to make sure that you do have a smooth way of delivering things between orgs. And then as you're able to, and then taking the packaging workflow as a secondary aspect. But okay, any other pain points and other points that people would like to hear about?
Hi, I'm Gautam. We use sandboxes in our org. So one of the pain points that we do say is we use Jenkins to commit to Git, and then that deploys into the org. So the issue that we find is how do we deploy the delta, assume that we have updated a layout. Rather than commit the entire branch, we just want to deploy that particular layout. So that's, yeah.
Okay, great. I'll cover that in a minute. Yeah, perfect. Other pain points, difficulties?
And maybe something if you can focus on, if you can just spend some time on the source tracking, like how the new feature from Salesforce, the source tracking, like how it will help, or is it going to help the DevOps?
Okay, excellent. Okay, great. Source tracking. Okay, and we do have a question verbally from Rutika or in chat. How do I go learn about DevOps and Salesforce DX? I'm going to go ahead and give the standard official Salesforce answer, which is Trailhead, but I'm going to give you a slightly biased version of that, which is that we have a couple of Trailhead modules that Copado has created. So if you just go to Trailhead and you search for DevOps on Trailhead, I wrote these 2 modules. So they're real 1 hour each. They're quick to do, and they'll give you a nice basic overview of things. So that's one place you can go to learn more. Good question, Rutika. And thanks so much for those of you who, Gautam and Angel, who put in other points about how you do it. And then Shilpa asked about how to get hands-on. So these modules teach you some of the basics. There's other Trailhead modules that'll teach you things about Salesforce DX. Copado, because I'm biased, I do work for Copado. They're good people. They've got some good training materials as well. If you go to the learning path here, there's a learning path where you can go to the Copado community, for example, ask lots of questions here. It's like the Salesforce success community or Trailblazer community, but you can also spin up a sample Copado org and so forth. And you can, that's one of a number of practice options. And Click Deploy is a nice, again, showing my bias, right? Because Click Deploy is now part of Copado also, but this is a nice, easy way to get started where you can sign up with Salesforce and do some deployments from here. Click Deploy is a good tool. Okay, so I've revealed all my biases, but I'm going to, most of the rest of the concepts are going to be sort of general, no matter what tool or process you're going to use and so forth. So, so I'd like to talk a little bit more about automation, right? Because we've got this, Gautam mentioned about using Jenkins, and some of you mentioned about using Click Deploy and so forth. Automation's all about letting the robots do the work, right? That's what you want. You want all the robots to do your jobs. You can just kick back and relax at work and still get paid. So we've got these 5 stages. The Copado, we kind of simplified the whole maturity curve, maturity model into these 5 stages. This is an oversimplification, but we think about the first way you start is select and deploy. And that's what you're doing with a change set. You go and build a change set, you select a bunch of metadata, and you can deploy it. First level. Second level is you begin to add in some version control, like Gautam's describing, they've got some version control in there. That's great because it gives you history and so forth. Third level is agile releases. And so this is the question that Gautam was asking. How can I release just the bits that change? That's what you could call an agile release, where it's just the differences as opposed to the whole thing. Not everybody has mastered that. A lot of people on version control have not figured out the technology for that. Then continuous delivery. This is, as a buzzword, CD, CI, CD, if you've heard that. That's about moving small batches of changes very, very quickly. And then continuous innovation, that's where you really start to take your whole development process as a team and just experiment and figure out what are the metrics, what are the metrics you want to measure, what do you optimize for, how do you learn together as a team. So I'm going to walk you through these. I'll try to move it fairly fast, but in an understandable way. So like I said, the first job, make it easier to deploy. Job number 1, make it easier to deploy. How can you do that? One way is you build a better change set, and that's kind of what Click Deploy is, right? It's a better change set, makes it easier to select, easier to deploy. What happens then if you make deployments easier is that you can deploy more frequently. And if you deploy more frequently, you have improved satisfaction. You avoid a lot of the problems that we described earlier. So just that alone is a really good place to start. Now the second level. See, we're racing through these 5 levels already. The second level is about version control. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. I've got 2A and then 2B, and it will be the next line. So 2A is version control with generic CI tools like Jenkins and scripts written in things like Ant or the Salesforce CLI. These are generic tools, can be useful for different technologies, but I describe this as the minimum sane level to operate at, just because I'm very biased and I'm a real big fan of version control. Why am I a fan of version control? Because I've been a developer, I've written code, and I've come back a week or 2 later, and I've looked at that code, and I'm like, did I write this? Did somebody change this? Is this the way it used to be? I had no idea. My memory just doesn't work that well, right? And you've got 50 classes and 40 flows and all this stuff. Who knows who's changing what and why, right? And let alone if you inherit an org, you're a consultant, you're a high-paid consultant like Sudipta, they drop you in and they're like, oh, figure out all our stuff. And you come in, you have no idea why any of it's there. And you're like, okay, all right. Consultants are just people with a higher threshold of tolerance for pain than typical people. They have more patience and determination. So job 2, version control makes things safe and sane. You can track the work, you know the history, but history tracking also, you can coordinate more easily. You can merge changes between developers. That's really very, very helpful. And then building on that, you can make deployments automated. And that's what Gautam was describing with Jenkins and Ant, and makes it faster to deploy between these different environments. And then you can have more frequent deployments and everybody gets happier and happier. And that's level 2. But like Gautam was saying, how do you deploy, there's some unusual challenges with Salesforce, right? And so this is where these commercial tools come in. Version control with commercial tools, they bring a lot of benefits that are hard to get with scripts. They give you a single source of truth. You can track all the activities in one central tool, but also some of this intelligence. They've done actually parsing the XML and metadata, and they know how to pull things apart. And they've spent a lot of time coding things on the back end so that you don't have to. So you can have things like auto-resolving errors and seamlessly deploying complex changes. And more of these commercial tools can also help you to deploy data. Because if you're working, if in your organization you've got a complex application like Salesforce CPQ, Velocity, Encino, Financial Force, whatever, all of those tools, they use a lot, there's a lot of configuration in there, and it's all configured with data, not metadata. And so just like you need to move Salesforce metadata changes carefully, if you're running with Salesforce CPQ, your company's business, all the money you make runs through Salesforce CPQ. If you introduce a bug in production, that hurts the organization. So you want to deploy data so you can fully automate every aspect of the data. And then again, nobody's yelling at you, everybody's happier. Right? So level 3, though, when we talk about story-based deployments or agile deployments, this is where tools, this is one of the ways that Copado really excels, is allowing you to take just one user story worth of change and say, I want to move just this one user story, or I want to move these 10 user stories except for this one. This one, they didn't really like that, so I'm going to hold that back. I'm going to move these 9 others. And you can move things, again, more frequent deployments, smaller deployments. Big deployments, risky. The only reason people do big deployments is because deployments are such a pain in the butt. You make deployments less of a pain in the butt. You can do smaller deployments, fewer failures. You can track the progress of your user story, like, hey, what's the status of that user story? Is that in testing now? Is it in production? Oh yeah, we moved it to production last week. You can answer those questions easily. So you have shorter test cycles, faster feedback, and you start getting these very happy users. And just moving you through the rest of this continuous delivery, this is when you're really mapping out all of your environments and you're really expediting the circulation of changes between these different environments. If you have multiple development sandboxes, you're easily and quickly moving changes between them. You're moving changes to these production environments as well. And that's the 4th level. And the 5th level is, at some point, you graduate beyond a formula. You graduate beyond first do this, second do this, and so forth. And you begin to think about, let's experiment. Let's figure out, what can we do to increase the frequency of our deployments? I don't know. Let's be creative. Let's experiment. Let's try something out. Let's try it for 2 weeks and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, we'll stop doing it. If it does, we'll implement it as a standard process. And that's where you begin to need some of these tools for tracking metrics and having overall goals and really engaging everybody's creative minds. And that's a rich level of maturity for a development team. So these are the 5 levels. These select and deploy, version control, agile releases, continuous delivery, and then continuous innovation. And I'd like to show, this is a Copado customer. It's a big industrial company in Europe. Maybe those of you in Brussels might be familiar with Linde. There's a lot of data on this slide. They got some financial value from optimizing their process. But the stat that I really like is in 2015, they were the lowest performing development team in Linde. The Salesforce team had the most infrequent deployments, the most errors, the most pain, and so forth. But by 2018, 2019, they were the highest performing development team in their company. So they had more frequent deployments, shorter lead time, fewer failures in production, and so forth. And that is really cool, right? Because Salesforce is a really stable platform. It's very hard to break it. It's very easy and fast to make changes. So we have a huge advantage as long as we've got a good process, a good way of moving changes through. So I'd love to hear from you guys now. What level would you guys say your teams are operating at today? And then what are your biggest challenges in moving changes, doing deployments? Any thoughts, input?
So the team that I'm working with, probably 3, I would say, in a range of 1 to 5. And the biggest challenges, each deployment, we are dealing with profile permission, FLS, and then we are dealing with the post deployment manual steps. And by doing that, each environments are in different shape. They're not in sync. So literally the only environment that we can trust is the production. And even we can't trust the UAT because the permission FLS is different. So that's probably the biggest challenge.
How much, in a typical week, Sudipta, how many, say, hours do you think you're spending struggling with things that you wouldn't be struggling with if the orgs were all in sync and you had an easy way to manage deployments? Any estimate?
I would say, it's part story basis. Like any story where I have to deal with profile like FLS and all this thing, each environment, I would say a couple of hours, like 2 hours on each environment.
And how many environments are there?
Like a dev, QA, UAT, production, and then a training environment after production.
So that's 10 hours, 10 to 15 hours per user story, maybe.
Almost, yeah.
So how many?
Yeah. So normally, Dev and QA, we give permission to all the profiles. We don't want to spend time there. When it moves to UAT, that is the time when we start tracking. We normally do a org refresh every month, but the moment the org refresh is done, it's in sync. But within 1 or 2 weeks, it's become in sync again, out of sync again. So it's definitely a discipline problem, I understand. But at the end of the day, it's not only the process, it's the discipline of the individual working in the team, as well as challenges to track also.
Yeah, it's a discipline problem, but I mean, if it was easier, the discipline would be a lot easier, right? I mean, it's really, hard and painful and error prone, then it's kind of hard to be super disciplined with. I'm thinking ahead to at the very end. I've got this thing about the ROI, the financial impact, and so forth. If you think about Sudipta, you burning 10 or 15 hours per user story on just some of this frustrating stuff, do you feel like that's the highest value thing you could be offering to the company and to the project, or is there something more useful than FLS?
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, I also hate writing the post deployment manual steps, for this fail, give profile permission to this many profile, and then writing that in an Excel. It's always a pain, right? So, and we always ended up copying from others and then changing here and there. So that's another thing which adds the frustration.
And so when I've mentioned a couple of times, I've mentioned commercial tools. Copado is a commercial tool, for example. These things, you pay the company money, they give you a better tool. The challenge, though, at our level, if we're admins and developers, sometimes we're like, well, it's a little bit expensive, and I'm not, my budget is $200, and I don't really have the. But if you begin to add up the inefficiency of somebody like Sudipta having to burn 10 or 15 hours per user story of his time, and you think about the impact on the company, and you think about what's the actual cost to the company of not having Sudipta maximally effective, you begin to see, actually, this is a really big deal, that you guys are giving your hearts to automate other people's workflow.
Exactly.
Right? You're putting all of your creativity, your big brains, your big hearts into automating other people's workflow, right? Who's automating your workflow?
Exactly.
If your workflow sucks, why is that? That's not cool. And so that's what we're talking about with DevOps. And then Stephen, thanks for chiming in about the level of your team. Okay, so I feel like I could chat about this for a long time, but I'm going to move forward to make sure we touch on some of these other things. Oh, and the financial point was the next one anyway, which I'd forgotten. If you go to Salesforce's website, you can look at the ROI of developing apps on the Salesforce platform. So ROI of Salesforce platform, you'll find this calculator, and Astro will walk you through calculating. Oh, they've changed the user interface, but it used to look more like this, where Astro comes in here and asks you a few questions. And at the end, Astro will tell you this is how much money the organization could save and benefit from if you moved onto Salesforce. So somebody at your company already made that decision. They already went through the calculator. They moved you onto Salesforce and so forth. But the point that I'd like to draw your attention to, if you look at the business value of building on Salesforce, some of it is IT infrastructure savings because you're not running your own servers, but most people aren't running their own servers these days anyway. But look at this, IT staff productivity savings. That means you could make your IT staff, the Sudiptas of the world, that much more efficient, right? And business productivity, you've got, if you read the fine print down here, the gain in productivity from faster time to delivery. You can deliver an app faster on the Salesforce platform than on other platforms. But I ask you, right? Doesn't that vary a lot depending on the team? Like some teams can deliver apps really, really fast. And some teams, you only have a monthly deployment. So it doesn't matter how quickly you can build the flow, if you've got to wait till the end of the month, or if you've got to work through the FLS and so forth. So there is a big difference between the haves and the have-nots in terms of the effectiveness of building on the Salesforce platform. And there is a financial impact to this. So this is a depiction of what's known as the value stream, which the idea is, I'm back to that whole thing about how you guys get paid to do your work, right? You get paid, presumably, unless you're just volunteers, because you're bringing some value to the organization above and beyond how much you get paid, right? So from somebody in the organization is thinking your job is to deliver awesomeness, and all of that awesomeness has some value to the company. Hard to calculate in detail, but if you average it out. So that value stream is the process of going from an idea to something awesome. And what's that have to go through? Some planning process, some building process, testing, deploying process. And there can be these inefficiencies in that process. And where the metric after you have built something, Apex class, Flow, whatever, before it's running in production, how much time elapses? So you build the flow, it works, and you click your stopwatch as a developer and admin, you say, done, start the timer. Then how much time elapses before it's actually running in production? Hours, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months. That amount of time is called lead time. And so if there's a financial benefit to each of those awesome things you create, then there's also a cost of delay. If you get it now, you get more benefit faster than if you get it a month from now. Plus also you can then iterate more quickly on that. So there's a few of these key metrics we tend to talk about when we talk about these development metrics: lead time, deployment frequency, change fail rate. When you make a change in production, how often do you break something? And when you break something, if you break something in production, at that point, the only metric that matters is how quickly can you get it back up and running. Nobody cares about any other metric at that point. Like, how fast can you fix this? So the final most important metric. So I've done maybe 50 interviews with different companies and customers and so forth to try to ask them these questions about what's their lead time, what's their deployment frequency, how often do they have failures, how long does it take to recover, a few other questions to try to estimate. This line in the middle, this line is what Salesforce says you'll get over 5 years. What Salesforce says that you'll get is about the red line. You know, maybe you weren't expecting to see financial charts in this presentation, but anyway, who expects anything in life, right? Life's full of surprises. So this red line, this is the cost of paying for Salesforce. If Salesforce brought you no more value than the cost of licenses, then the net financial impact would be this horizontal line. What Salesforce says they'll bring you is this sort of middle line. But what I saw when I interviewed these groups is that some of these groups were really low performing, underperforming, and some of these groups were overperforming the average that Salesforce gave you. And a little bit of an overperformance or an underperformance, 5%, 10%. If you add it up over 12 months, 24 months, 60 months, over 5 years time, it makes a big financial impact. It's the same as, you know, in putting your money in investments, so it has compound interest. If you make a 10% improvement on the efficiency of your development team now, over the course of 5 years, that's a lot more features you can roll out, a lot fewer failures. It does have a big financial impact over time. So we talked to a big technology company, and this big technology company has 35,000 Salesforce users, 90 admins and developers. They've been with Copado just really a little over a year. But in the first year, they made all of these improvements. They had far more feature adoption. Because you can roll things out more quickly, you can build the right things. They had 8 development teams, and across those, they saved roughly 4,500 hours a year, 40% more features delivered, 94% fewer production bugs, 75% reduced lead time, 5 times more frequent deployments, and almost 200 times faster to recover. And so when we quantified that, it looked like a business impact, almost $90 million per year for that organization across those different fronts. So that's why I'm going back to that original slide on the exponential impact. That's where what you guys are doing is important for the whole company. And you might feel like you're just trapped in the metadata dungeon of your org, like building Salesforce configuration and code and so forth. But it's important for you and everybody to think about the company-wide impact that you guys have. Think about the financial impact that your teams have. Think about what goals you want to accomplish, because every company is different. Like, so for Sudipta's group that he's working on, one of the main goals may be moving some more of the code into these modular packages so that they're a little faster to deploy. But why is that? Like, what's the goal of modularizing the code? Think, 1 or 2 steps further. Well, is it just to make everything more maintainable? Or what's the big pain that the organization is feeling? Do you just want things faster? Do you want more frequent updates? Do you want more stability? What's the company need? And work backwards. And then helping those higher leaders in the organization to appreciate that impact. So just some questions for you guys to think about. What would you think are the main things that your companies are interested in? What would be the main benefits that they'd love to see your Salesforce team delivering, or main things they'd like to see you not doing, like breaking things in production? Any thoughts?
I think my team definitely needs more frequent deployment instead of the monthly deployment to be real agile, if we can say. So that's definitely something, always a fight between the business and the tech team, IT team, right? Business needs something very quickly, and IT is always going out with the traditional monthly deployment plan. So that's definitely a scope of improvement in my team.
And the IT team would deliver more frequently if it was just easier, right? But I think the business doesn't appreciate the pain and the difficulty.
Exactly. It's just we don't want the pain every alternate week or every week. That's why we want the pain only on monthly basis.
Yeah, makes sense. Kostya faster restore time, right? Everybody wants the idea that, oh, we'd never deploy a bug to production, right? Ideally, but you never are, you can never take that risk to zero, right? So the important thing is if you do deploy a bug to production, make it so short-lived. Figure out what you can do to get that information from users fast about what went wrong and figure out how to restore quickly. Other things your organizations would like to see from the team? Now, I guess I'm suspecting many of you may be the doers, right? You're the people who do the real work, right? You're the ones who actually build things. You're not the ones who are in the business meetings necessarily, but at some point, if you do a really good job, and innovation, Kostya is saying, just the ability to innovate and solve problems that aren't otherwise not being solved. But here's the thing, just I'm warning you about what the future holds. When you get really good at doing your job, they're probably going to promote you or your manager's going to leave and you're going to get their job. And eventually you're going to find yourself being sucked up into the world of management, right? And we're not necessarily optimized as managers. If you're a really good developer and doer, that doesn't automatically mean you're going to be a really good manager and so forth. But maybe you will be. It's a different skill set. But we can still be getting a head start and trying to ask these real questions. And these are not too different from the questions that a developer would ask, which is, what's the problem? Like, what are you actually trying to do, right? Okay, more innovation. You want more innovation. Okay, so how can we find more innovation? And then everything, all of the other complexity you've got, all the management meetings and team structure and all the other stuff that managers have to do. At the end of the day, it's supposed to be just serving some business need, like maximizing innovation or maximizing stability and having fast downtime. And so you still will have a chance, if you're sucked up in the world of management, you'll still have a chance to use your developer, your creative, your analytical mind. But it starts always with asking good questions. And a lot of managers and a lot of IT teams, a lot of businesses, they don't even ask really good questions like, what do you want? What are we trying to solve? What do we need? And that's the real uncommon skill is common sense and just creative thinking. Discovery questions, Mark. Yeah, exactly. In the interest of time, how to learn more, you can check out copado.com for tons of info and free resources. Feel free to connect with Copado. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and Twitter. There's one site. I'll send it in the chat. There's an information hub that we created here. I put the link in the chat that has a lot of the really good resources oriented towards folks like yourselves who are responsible for actually doing development and release managers. So a lot of the webinars we've given, white papers, articles, and as I mentioned, here in the learning community, there's this Copado community where you can get a hands-on org and ask questions and so forth. Thank you. Sometimes I have in here a shameless self-promotion with a picture of my book. So again, if you want to learn a lot more about all of this, you can certainly get that book, Mastering Salesforce DevOps. But I'd love to just open it up. Any other questions that you guys might have or thoughts to share with the group?
It's awesome. And I think Andrew, we are planning for another Copado specific session, how to start with Copado in probably 2 weeks of time. I need to check with you. But just for the others, like, there is a session coming up on Copado just to make sure, because I need to learn Copado. In one of my projects, they are bringing Copado. So it's high time for me to learn, and Copado is like, doing an awesome job.
Great, and Kostya, nice to see that you've already got the book. It's a big book, right? So don't feel bad if you've gotten halfway through it. A joke that can be used as a weapon if necessary as well. But, so Khaldun's asking, does Copado provide event monitoring capability like Splunk? Splunk is a tool, if you're not familiar with it, that sort of monitors servers and data storage and network traffic and brings all that monitoring stuff together. Copado doesn't have anything like that today. It's certainly, you know, there are things in the Salesforce world where that kind of monitoring would be really useful. What we do have are some monitoring tools about the development life cycle, how quickly you can move changes through, how frequently you're doing deployments, you know, where most of the changes in the metadata happening. So we do have analytics tools like that that are in that same category, because, yeah, so the reason, if you've never heard of Splunk, the reason you've never heard of Splunk is because Salesforce handles a lot of that stuff for you, right? They kind of keep things running. And so some of the traditional tools, IT tools, are not as necessary in Salesforce. But like I said in the beginning, right? Easy means fast, means more, means complex. So we're getting to the point in the world of Salesforce where we need some of these more traditional tools for managing complexity, because there's a lot of complexity in the orgs you're building. Great. Other questions?
Yeah.
Isaac.
At our company, we use Click Deploy.
Yeah.
What I want to know is if Copado caters for the element of time when it comes to running test classes. Like, for example, if a developer is finished working on one story and it's being promoted, they want it to be promoted to maybe QA or maybe UAT faster. I start, running the test classes, but I can't run any other test class maybe for a different story until the first one is done. So I was wondering if Copado caters for that you can run these tests concurrently to save time. Because if this one takes, I'll have to wait for like an hour for this one to finish. Then another one comes in, so it kind of like affects that increment of flow. Yeah, so.
Yeah, it does. Copado does have that ability to, you group your work. In Copado, the way it works, you have user stories and you group all of your work, the metadata changes onto the user story. But on that user story, you can specify which test classes are tied to the work that you did. And then when you deploy that user story, it can trigger just those test classes, just the test classes that are needed for that particular user story.
How about if some people believe in, running all the test classes every time on every story, they want you to run all the test classes. It's like you have to do it.
There can be benefit to running test classes that are not directly touching the metadata. You might identify some regression failure and so forth. But the challenge is that in Salesforce, it takes a fairly long time to run all the unit tests. So that really slows down the deployment. So you need to think like a QA tester, which is, yes, in theory, we would retest everything, but the cost of retesting everything is quite high. And the risk is not necessarily that high. So you have to balance. And so it's a very reasonable decision to, for example, only deploy or only run the way a balance that in my mind is very sensible is only deploy the test, only run the test classes that are related to the things that you're deploying for all of the deployments. But periodically in an environment like your QA environment or your UAT environment, maybe have a nightly scheduled run of all the unit tests. So every night you can run all the unit tests in the UAT environment, and maybe you'll find a regression failure that didn't come up before. But you don't have to slow down every release process with rerunning all those tests, because that's very expensive. It's a little bit imbalanced and then as long as all the unit tests pass in UAT, then that should give you confidence that you can run the deployment to production, just testing the changes that you made there. So you don't have to block the production org with a 3-hour unit test run or whatever. It's not going to take the risk of failures down to 0, but nothing is going to take the risk of failures down to 0. Unit tests are not going to take the unit tests are not a perfect gauge, but it's going to reduce it. And then back to that point that Kostya made, then you need to focus on how can we recover quickly, because there's always going to be some problems, but your ability to recover quickly is quite important also.
Thank you.
It's this cost benefit thing. You're living in an imperfect world, and that's the problem.
I agree.
You probably noticed that already. Sometimes we have to remind each other. Right? Nothing is perfect, right? But there's a cost-benefit trade-off. Something makes something reasonable. All right. Well, you guys are awesome. I'm really delighted to have had a chance to have this conversation. Thank you so much for you guys making this a two-way conversation, not just a monologue, and gone on camera and giving me the confidence that there's actually humans here to talk to. So it's a joy to meet you. Feel free to connect with me on Twitter and LinkedIn. If you send the connection soon, I'll know, oh, you came from the Kitchener developer group. If you send the connection just saying, hey, I've got a job opportunity for you, I'll just delete it. So, anyway, spam, right?
Yep.
But
thank you so much, Andrew. No, thank you so much. Yeah, and it's really helpful. So we will discuss about the next session about which will be more specific about Copado. Perfect.
I don't know, what's my LinkedIn link? I guess I can find that someplace here. So, if you just look up Andrew Davis, Salesforce DevOps, oh, look at you. People are so fast. Look at this. Great. All right. Well, it's a joy to meet you all.
Yep. Thank you so much and have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.